Della stood at the kitchen sink with her hands in cold water and a list of numbers in her head that did not add up. She had been standing there for 11 minutes. She knew because the clock above the stove made a sound every time the minute hand moved, and she had counted. 11 sounds. 11 minutes of standing and not moving and not knowing what the next thing was supposed to be. The envelope was still on the counter behind her. She had not touched it since she opened it 3 hours ago. The paper inside had her name on it. Typed, formal, with a courthouse seal at the top. It had her husband's name on it too. And a date. And a list of what belonged to who now. The house was his. The car was his. The savings account, the one she had put money into every month for 11 years, $20 here, $40 there, sometimes $50 when she could manage it, was gone. Not his, just gone. Withdrawn. The account had been closed 6 weeks before she even knew the divorce was coming. His name was Leonard Pruitt. He was 51 years old. He wore pressed shirts to work and shook hands firmly and remembered the names of people he met only once. Everyone who knew him said he was a good man. Everyone who knew him had not been married to him for 14 years. Della was 47. She had put Leonard through 2 years of night school when his first company failed. She had taken on a second job at a dry cleaner on Route 9 when they were behind on the mortgage. She had stayed home the year his mother was dying because someone needed to be there, and he could not miss work. And she was the one who could rearrange things. She had rearranged a lot of things over 14 years. She had a daughter. Her name was Patrice and she was 16, and Leonard had gotten a lawyer 6 months ago without telling Della, and the lawyer had argued that Della's income was inconsistent, which was true, because she had cut her hours to take care of Leonard's mother, and that the home environment would be more stable with the father, which was not true, but was documented in a way that made it look true, and the judge had agreed. Patrice was living with Leonard now. In the house. The one that was his. Della stood at the sink with her hands in cold water and thought about the number $312. That was what she had in her checking account. That was the number that was real. Everything else was paper and memory. She dried her hands. She turned off the light. She went to the bedroom in the apartment she was renting from a woman named Georgie, who lived upstairs and charged $800 a month and never asked questions. She did not cry that night. She had cried the week before. The night she moved her things into the apartment in 3 trips in a borrowed car. She had cried until there was nothing left of it. Now she just lay on the bed with her shoes still on and looked at the ceiling and thought about what her mother used to say. Her mother's name had been Ruth. Ruth had grown up in Georgia and moved north when she was 22 and spent the rest of her life working in other people's kitchens and making it look easy. She used to say, "The thing about starting over is that you already know how to start. You've done it before. You just forgot." Della had forgotten, but she was starting to remember. The thing about Leonard that nobody outside saw was how long it had been planned. Della found out later, from a paralegal at the firm who felt bad about her role in it, that Leonard had begun consulting with the attorney 14 months before he filed. 14 months of moving money. 14 months of restructuring accounts in ways that were legal, but were designed, specifically, to leave Della with nothing she could point to and call hers. He had asked her to quit the dry cleaner's job 2 years before that. He said they didn't need the money anymore. He said it was embarrassing, her coming home smelling like cleaning fluid. He said he wanted her available. She had believed him. She had quit. He had asked her to take her name off the car insurance, just to simplify things, he said, just to reduce the paperwork. She had done that too. He had asked her not to bother keeping track of the household account because he had a system and her involvement confused it. She had stepped back. She had trusted him. She had trusted him the way you trust someone you've shared a bed with for 14 years, which is completely and without thinking about it. The way you trust that the floor will be there when you step out of bed in the morning. The floor had not been there. She found out about his girlfriend from Patrice, who found out by accident, who told Della quietly one night before the move, sitting on the edge of the bed in her room, picking at a loose thread on her comforter. Her name was Vivienne. She worked in Leonard's building. Patrice had seen a photo on his phone. Della had nodded slowly. She had said, Thank you for telling me. She had not cried in front of her daughter. She thought about Vivian sometimes in the first weeks. Not with anger exactly, more with a strange quiet feeling, like standing in a room where someone moved all the furniture and you keep reaching for things that aren't there. What she kept coming back to was not the girlfriend. What she kept coming back to was the 14 months, the planning, the patience of it. She would wake up at 4 in the morning and lie there in the dark thinking, while I was making dinner, he was on the phone with a lawyer. While I was driving his mother to her appointments, he was moving the money. While I believed everything was difficult but fine, he had already decided. That was the thing that took the longest to process. Not the loss of the house or the car or the money, the loss of what she thought was true. Della's mother had left her 3 things when she died. A Bible with notes in the margins in her mother's handwriting, small and deliberate. A quilt that Ruth had made over 20 years, adding squares from fabric she saved from everything. Church dresses, kitchen curtains, the collar of a coat she wore when she came north. And a recipe book. Not a real book. Just a 3-ring binder with plastic sleeves, the kind you got at an office supply store. Inside were handwritten pages, index cards, torn pieces of notebook paper, some so old the ink had faded to brown. Ruth had learned to cook from her own mother, who had learned from hers, and the book held 50 years of that. Collard greens, cornbread, sweet potato pie, short ribs braised in something that took 4 hours and made the whole house smell like Sunday. Leonard had liked Ruth's cooking. He had told people at dinner parties that it was the best food he'd ever had. He had never once offered to help clean up. The recipe book had stayed in a box in the back of the closet for 2 years after Ruth died. Della couldn't open it without crying, so she didn't open it. She opened it now. She sat on the floor of the small apartment with the binder on her knees and went through it page by page. She read her mother's handwriting. She read the notes in the margins. Add a little more than you think, don't rush the low heat. Your grandmother said, patience is an ingredient. And she cried. But it was different from before. It was not the crying that empties you. It was the kind that reminds you what you're made of. She made the cornbread that night, then the greens, then the sweet potato pie. She ate alone at the small table by the window and watched the parking lot and thought. She thought for a long time. It started as something small. It started because Della needed money and had almost none, and because a woman at her church named Florence had a catering event coming up, and her usual person had canceled, and Della said, without entirely thinking it through, I can do it. Florence had looked at her carefully. Della had not cooked professionally. Florence knew this. Can you really? Florence said. Yes, Della said, I can really. She spent 48 hours cooking. She borrowed a car to transport everything. She showed up at the event, a retirement party in someone's backyard in Decatur, with chafing dishes and a folding table and food she had made from her mother's recipes, adjusted and scaled up, tasted 20 times. People went back for seconds, then thirds. A woman named Constance asked Della for a card. Della did not have a card. She wrote her phone number on a napkin. Her phone rang the next day, and the day after that. The money from that first event was $400. She had spent $200 on ingredients. She kept $200 and looked at it for a long time on the kitchen table before she put it away. She called Patrice that night. Patrice answered on the second ring. Mom, just the word the way 16-year-olds say it, flat on the surface but full underneath. I cooked tonight, Della said, for a party. How'd it go? Good, Della said. It went good. She paused. How are you doing? Fine, Patrice said. And then, I miss your sweet potato pie. Della closed her eyes. I know, she said. I'm going to make it for you soon. She was going to make more than that. The first equipment purchase was a commercial-grade steam tray insert. $38, secondhand, from a restaurant supply place closing its doors on Piedmont Avenue. The second was a set of half-hotel pans. The third was a used warming unit she found on a local listing site and drove 40 minutes to pick up, borrowing Florence's minivan. She did not have a truck. She did not have a commissary. What she had was the church kitchen, which Florence let her use on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, and a rotating cast of events she was building through word of mouth and 2 catering Facebook groups she joined. By the 3rd month, she was clearing $900 a month after expenses. It was not enough to live on easily, but it was hers. Every dollar of it had her name on it, and no one had moved it without telling her. And it was in an account she had opened herself, alone, at a credit union on the other side of town, and she was the only person who knew the PIN. She kept a notebook. Not like her mother's recipe binder, this one was practical. Expenses in one column, income in the other. She checked it every Sunday night. She did not let herself look away from the numbers even when they were uncomfortable. She had looked away from numbers once. She was not going to do it again. Patrice came to stay on weekends when Leonard allowed it. Della made her mother's recipes and they ate together and watched whatever Patrice wanted to watch. And some nights Patrice would sit on the counter while Della cooked and talk about school, her friends, a teacher she didn't like, a boy she was trying not to like. Della listened. She asked questions that didn't sound like interrogations. She was learning, slowly, how to be present in the time she had instead of grieving the time she didn't. One Saturday night, Patrice said, "Daddy's girlfriend is moving in." Della was at the stove. She stirred what was in the pot. She did not turn around immediately. "Okay," she said. "You're not upset?" Della thought about it. "I'm focused," she said finally. "There's a difference." Patrice was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's actually kind of cool, Mom." The food truck idea came from a man named Desmond Okafor, who ran a small business development nonprofit in the neighborhood and showed up at one of Della's catering events and stayed until the end and asked if she'd ever thought about going mobile. Della had not thought about it. She thought about it all the way home. She called Desmond the next week. He walked her through the numbers. A used truck, properly outfitted, could run anywhere from $15,000 to $40,000. She did not have that. He told her about an SBA microloan program. He told her about a city grant for food entrepreneurs in underserved zip codes. He told her the timeline was going to be at least a year, maybe more, and that she should keep doing what she was doing in the meantime because the revenue history would help with the loan application. "Keep your records clean," he said. "Keep your expenses documented. Build the history." She kept the records. She built the history. She applied for the city grant in month 8. She was rejected. She rewrote the application with help from Desmond and applied again. She was rejected again, with a note that said her business plan lacks specificity in the area of location strategy. She wrote a new business plan. She identified 3 neighborhoods in the city with high foot traffic and low access to the kind of food she made. She researched permit requirements for each location. She put it all in a document and sent it to the grant committee. She was approved on the 3rd application. The grant was $7,500. She sat in her car in the parking lot of the credit union and read the email 3 times. Then she drove to the church and went inside and sat in a pew for a while. She didn't pray exactly. She just sat. She thought about her mother. She thought about the recipe binder. She thought about the woman she had been 2 years ago, standing at the sink with her hands in cold water, counting the sounds of a clock. She thought, "Ruth, I hope you can see this." The truck took 4 more months after the grant. She found it in Tennessee, a 2017 Ford with a full kitchen build-out that needed work on the hood ventilation and had a dent in the rear panel the size of a dinner plate. She paid $11,000 for it with the grant money and a loan she had qualified for, barely but qualified. Desmond drove down with her to inspect it. "She's going to need some work," he said. "I know," Della said. "I'm not afraid of work." She named the truck Ruth's. She had a sign made, clean white letters on a dark green background, and a friend of a friend who did graphic design created her a logo for $200, a simple illustration of a woman's hands holding a bowl with a little steam rising from it. She opened on a Tuesday in late spring in the parking lot outside a university library, which had a permit arrangement with food vendors and drew a lunch crowd of students and faculty. She had made collard greens with smoked turkey, cornbread, macaroni and cheese from scratch, fried catfish, and sweet potato pie by the slice. She sold out in 2 hours and 40 minutes. She stood beside the empty truck, and looked at the line of people who had come too late. And she said, "I'll be back Thursday. Bring your friends." They came back Thursday. She sold out again. By the end of the first month, she had a small following on Instagram. By the end of the second, a food blog had posted about her. By the end of the third, there was a feature in the local paper. Not the main metro section, just the neighborhood digest. But it had her photo and the name of the truck and a quote from a regular customer who said, "This is the kind of food that makes you feel like someone's grandmother loves you." Della framed that article. She hung it inside the truck, near the window, where she could see it while she worked. The television thing was not something she planned. A local morning news program was doing a segment on women-owned small businesses for a feature they ran every month. A producer had found the food blog post and called the number on Della's website. She had a website now, 2 pages, nothing fancy, and asked if she'd be interested in being featured. She said yes before she finished reading the email. They came on a Wednesday morning. A camera crew of 2 and a reporter named Simone who was warm and prepared and asked the right questions. They filmed Della cooking in the truck. They filmed the line that formed. They filmed Simone eating a piece of sweet potato pie and making a face that required no commentary. Then Simone asked, "What's the story behind the name?" Della said, "My mother. Her name was Ruth. She taught me everything I know about cooking, and she taught me a few other things too." "Like what?" Della thought for a second. "She used to say that the thing about starting over is that you already know how. You've done it before. You just forgot." Simone looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded slowly and said, "We're definitely using that." The segment aired the following Tuesday at 7:45 in the morning, during the local news block. It was 4 minutes and 20 seconds long. Della watched it on her phone in the apartment, sitting on the edge of the bed with Patrice, who had spent the night, who had school in 2 hours, who kept grabbing Della's arm and saying, "Mom, Mom, that's you! That's actually you on TV!" Leonard saw it. She didn't know that until 3 days later when he texted her, a long message. She read it in the parking lot after her lunch shift, standing next to Ruth's with the engine still ticking from the drive. He said he'd been watching the news while he got ready for work. He said she looked well. He said he was proud of her, which was a strange thing to say, as if her life were still something he had a stake in. He said he had been thinking about things. He said he had been thinking about things. He said maybe they had made mistakes. He said he missed what they used to have. He said he wanted to talk. Della read the message twice. She stood in the parking lot and listened to the engine tick. She thought about the 14 months. She thought about the account that was closed before she knew to look for it. She thought about the night she moved her things in 3 trips in a borrowed car, and the apartment, and the $312, and the moment she opened her mother's recipe binder and decided. She turned her phone face down on the passenger seat. She got back in the truck and drove to her next location. The custody hearing was in November. Della had saved enough to hire an attorney. Not a big firm, but a careful woman named Audrey, who knew family law and did not make promises she couldn't keep. Audrey had reviewed the original custody arrangement and found 2 procedural issues in how Leonard's attorney had presented Della's employment history. She also had the catering records, the bank statements, the lease, the grant documentation, the business registration for Ruth's, and the newspaper article, and the television segment. Patrice, who was now 17, was asked by the court mediator which parent she wanted to live with. Della was not in the room for that conversation. She sat in a hallway on a wood bench with a paper cup of water and waited. She counted the tiles on the floor. She thought about her mother. She tried not to think about the outcome, because thinking about the outcome too hard felt like daring something to go wrong. The mediator came out after 40 minutes. Patrice would like to live primarily with her mother, she said, with regular visitation for the father. Della pressed her palms flat against her thighs and breathed. "Okay," she said. "Okay." Patrice came out a minute later. She was taller than Della remembered, which was impossible because it had only been 6 months since she'd seen her, but it was true. She looked like Ruth around the eyes. She had always looked like Ruth around the eyes. She had always looked like Ruth around the eyes. She walked straight to Della and put her arms around her without saying anything. Della held on. She did not let go for a long time. Ruse had 3 locations by the following spring. Not 3 trucks, she was working toward a second truck, but it wasn't there yet. 3 permitted stops, rotating through the week. With a small crew now, a woman from her church named Vivette, who was retired and had nothing to do, and turned out to be faster and more precise in a kitchen than anyone Della had ever worked with, and a college student named Marcus, who had come up to the window one afternoon to ask for a job and had referenced the television segment as the reason he found her. She was clearing $4,000 a month, net. Not wealthy, not even comfortable in the way she used to think of comfortable, but hers. Completely and undeniably hers. Leonard had lost 2 of his major clients that year. She heard this from a mutual acquaintance, not from him. She did not ask for details. She was not keeping score, or she was trying not to, which is not quite the same thing but is close enough. He texted again in the spring. She read the message. It was shorter this time. It said he hoped she was doing well. It said Patrice seemed happy. It said, "You built something real." She put the phone down on the counter of the truck and went back to work. There was a line. There was always a line now. On the first anniversary of the truck's opening, Patrice came to work with her for the whole day. She wore the extra apron. She learned how to ladle the greens without spilling. She ate 3 pieces of sweet potato pie over the course of the shift and maintained that each one was for quality control purposes. At the end of the day, when the truck was closed and cleaned and the last customer had gone, they sat together on the tailgate and drank sweet tea and watched the streetlights come on one by one down the block. "Do you ever think about what would have happened?" Patrice asked. "Like, if everything hadn't gone the way it did?" Della thought about it for real. She didn't give the easy answer. "Sometimes," she said, "I think about the version of me that stayed, that kept looking away from the numbers because it was easier, that kept believing something was fine when it wasn't. And I don't want to be her," Della said. "I feel sorry for her. But I don't want to be her." Patrice was quiet for a moment. "Grandma Ruth would have liked the truck," she said. "Yeah," Della said. "She would have complained about my cornbread ratio and then eaten 4 pieces." Patrice laughed, really laughed, the kind that surprised her. Della looked out at the street, at the lights, at the ordinary Thursday evening of the neighborhood moving around them. She thought about the apartment and the sink and the cold water and the 11 minutes. She thought about the 3-ring binder. She thought about the woman at the retirement party in Decatur who had asked for a card, and the napkin she had written her number on, and the phone that rang the next day. She thought about what her mother had said. "You already know how. You've done it before. You just forgot." She had not forgotten. And now, with her daughter beside her on the tailgate, and the line that came every day, and the name of a woman named Ruth painted in white letters on the side of a dark green truck, she was pretty sure she never would again. Here is the question the story leaves with you. If someone who had taken everything from you, your home, your savings, your sense of what was real, came back years later and said they missed you, said they had changed, said they wanted another chance, would you believe them? Would you let them in? Or would you, like Della, simply put the phone face down and go back to the work that was yours? I keep thinking about the sink, cold water. 11 minutes of standing still and counting the sounds of a clock, because counting was the only thing that felt manageable. That image stays with me because I think most people know that feeling. Not necessarily that exact situation, but that specific kind of stillness that comes when everything you thought was solid turns out to have been paper the whole time. What happened to Della wasn't just bad luck. It was the result of a long pattern of choices. His choices, yes, but also hers, made in good faith, made from trust, made without the information she deserved to have. She looked away from the numbers. She stepped back from the accounts. She believed that love was the same thing as safety, and she paid for that belief in a way that was not fair but was real. That's not a judgment. That's just what happens when we mistake someone's presence for their integrity. And here's what I find myself thinking about most. Leonard didn't just take things. He took them slowly, deliberately, over 14 months, while the life they shared continued on the surface. That's not a mistake or a moment of weakness. That's a choice made by someone who looked at a person who trusted him and decided that was a vulnerability to exploit rather than a gift to protect. What you put into the world with that kind of intention, that cruelty, that calculated patience, it comes back. Not always neatly, not always on your timeline, but it comes back because actions have consequences that compound over time the same way interest does. What Della did in response is the part that I can't stop thinking about. She didn't have connections. She didn't have a safety net. She had $12 and a binder full of her mother's handwriting. And she chose, deliberately, on purpose, to let that be enough to start with. That's not blind optimism. That's intelligence. She looked at what she actually had instead of grieving what was gone. And she built a plan from the real number instead of the imaginary one. She also kept her records clean. She documented everything. She learned what she had refused to learn before, that knowing your numbers is not a failure of trust. It's a basic act of self-respect. That shift, from looking away to looking directly, is what changed everything. It's what made the loan possible, made the grant possible, made the second custody hearing come out differently. Wisdom isn't something that arrives fully formed. Sometimes it comes from getting burned badly enough that you decide, once and for all, you are going to pay attention. And then there's the part that I think about when I'm tired and things feel harder than they should. She kept going when there was no visible reason to believe it would work. Application rejected. Apply again. Rejected again. Rewrite it. Apply again. That kind of persistence isn't dramatic. It doesn't look like anything from the outside. It just looks like a woman sitting at a table at night working on a document, refusing to stop. That's what grit actually looks like, not a moment of triumph. A Tuesday evening, choosing to try again. Della put the phone face down. She went back to work. That's the whole story, really. Not the truck, not the TV segment, not the custody hearing. Just a woman who decided that her life was hers and acted accordingly, one day at a time, until it was true.